Hello, my name is Vesa Juvonen and I work as a principal consultant in a Microsoft Corporation. In this video, we will have a closer look on a SharePoint customization patterns related on the full trust code to the cloud application pattern, and we'll concentrate more on the site provisioning techniques, what are those options, what we have been using in the past, and what is the future of site provisioning patterns in SharePoint 2013 and the following versions. The key concentration is on the question that when we are transforming our SharePoint customizations from a full trust code to the cloud application model or the SharePoint app model, is it reality? So can we actually do and achieve the certain scenarios or the business objectives, what quite often these site provisioning tools are for? So let's actually start going through the individual slides. Before we actually go through any further, a quick introduction, who am I? So I'm a principal consultant in Microsoft, has been working in Microsoft since 2006, which is 7 years roughly already. I've also been working in a SharePoint 2010 and 2013 Ignite programs, currently work as within the Worldwide Center of Excellence SharePoint virtual team as a SharePoint Ranger, and I've been also a MCM or MCSM instructor and content owner on specific development-oriented topics from the rotation 1 all the way until the end of the whole program, which seems to be ended on September 2013. As mentioned, I'm also personally Microsoft Certified Solution Master or the Microsoft Certified Master, and there's some additional funky logos and everything else on the slides. I love doing PowerPoint slides, so that's one of my certifications, so to say, as a joke. Anyway, for today we're going to concentrate on the site provisioning and the customization patterns in a SharePoint, and how did we actually get here? What's the current, let's say, models, what we can do, and what is the future related on the site provisioning and these customization patterns. Before we actually go there, one of the really interesting, or one of the really important things to realize, or let's say to think about as part of the SharePoint 2013 is actually the kind of a transition away from the general recommendation to always customize SharePoint. Or what do I actually mean with that? Well, I don't know if you've seen this text already before, but as part of the Beta 2 release in a SharePoint 2013, the SharePoint product team released this blog post, which was an introduction to the greatest and latest features in SharePoint 2013. And one of the statements within that blog post caused a lot of discussion in the community. And the statement was that use SharePoint as out-of-the-box application whenever possible, which is an interesting statement, and that obviously caused a lot of questions. And so does it mean that we shouldn't be anymore customizing the site provisioning, as an example, or branding? And that's not what it actually means. It means more likely, or well, not likely, it actually means that it's more beneficial to always challenge the need of the customizations. Obviously, if you're doing internet-facing sites, you will probably need to concentrate on branding. If you're doing business solutions on top of the SharePoint, yes, you will still do SharePoint customizations. Will you do them using the old full trust code approach, or will you be using the SharePoint app pattern? That's a different question. In general, however, we always should be concentrating on the approach that, as an example for the collaboration sites, it will be the most cost efficient in a short and a long term to go as close as out of the box as possible within the deployment, regardless is it the cloud or is it an on-prem, and that's also due to the fact that less customizations means less maintenance, and therefore the upgrading to newer versions will be much easier. And this has a massive impact in our customizations as well. So we need to always, as an architect or a person responsible of these customizations, we need to actually understand that the implication of our customizations. And related on that, actually, the impact of the customizations is that as part of the planning, as part of the evaluation of the proper approach of introducing certain scenarios, like in this case, we're going to concentrate on the site provisioning techniques, but in any other case, there are certain implications with the chosen path. The customizations will have a direct impact on your maintenance and operational costs, including the availability challenges. As an example, if we would be deploying site definitions with the full trust solution approach, because, well, you can't deploy site definitions using any other means, that would always mean that if there's any maintainable anything to maintain or update as part of your site definitions, or let's say the master pages or page layouts associated to the site definition, there would be always a service break related on updating those, and we need to understand that, and the business owners and the architects need to understand the implications on the availability for the based on the chosen customization path. The customization will also impact on the agility on deploying the new functionalities and widgets. And let's actually use the page layouts and master pages as a good example. It means that, as an example, if we would be using full trust solutions to deploy our page layouts and master pages, every single time there would be an update to these artifacts, we would actually have a service break. Then the alternative approach could be just as simple as if we are talking about only few site collections, we could be using just SharePoint Designer. And think about storing the information and those master pages and page layouts in a content database, not on the file system of the server. Because, well, regardless on the fact that, yes, and theoretically, the SharePoint can actually process those master pages and page layouts slightly faster from the servers, but nowadays the hardware and the network connectivity between the servers and between the SharePoint server and the database is so good that that change or the impact of storing the page layouts and master pages in a database or in the file system of the server is not actually any more significant. One of the dimensions on the customization impact is also the disaster recovery implications. So if we would be using still full trust code, every single time we restore, we need to make sure that the full trust code is matching on the level of what the content database actually has. Otherwise, you might end up in a situation where you have a reference in your content database to a feature within a file system which doesn't exist. In a worst case scenario. Obviously, if you would be deploying your artifacts to the content database using, for example, remote provisioning, we're going to talk about that later today, or sandbox solutions or SharePoint Designer, you would actually have all of the changes within the content database. Therefore, as long as you get the content database, you're able to actually restore your service, which is pretty interesting approach as well. And the kind of a fourth consideration is the long-term roadmap impact. Quite often recently I've heard the statement that, yeah, we will be still using the site definitions because the customer is not planning to go to the cloud with this deployment, which might be true. But what will happen? Can we actually ensure that in 5 years? Time frame? What if the director level of the customer will be changed and there will be a new CIO walking into the customer and they would be demanding or start questioning the fact that why aren't we actually putting our stuff into the cloud? And the chosen path of using custom site definition would be a then blocking factor, keeping the SharePoint in the on-premises as an example. And that would also have an impact on the upgradability or upgrading costs whenever there's a new version of the SharePoint available. So whatever we choose, it's never, well, first of all, it's not black and white to which choose and what's not to choose, but whatever we choose, we need to understand the short-term and the long-term impact of the chosen architectural approach. And after this, let's use the site provisioning as a good example. So let's think about those different options and alternatives what we actually have in a SharePoint introduced partly already in 2003, 2007, 2010, and 2013. So what kind of options do we actually have, and then compare that to the new SharePoint app model. So can we actually achieve the same end result using the SharePoint app and a more client-side oriented approach? Because when you think of it, if we can achieve the same end result using an alternative, let's say the SharePoint app pattern without any customizations in a SharePoint, it's really, that would be a really an awesome thing, because then we can actually modify those customizations of the provisioning engine, which is actually stored outside of the SharePoint without impacting the SharePoint availability. Again, if you have a look on the slide, maintenance, operational cost impact, the disaster and recovery impact, and so forth. And let's talk about those. Let's start with something which we have been actually having for quite a long time, which is the feature stapling technique. And feature stapling is actually something which we don't introduce new model or new template to be available within for the end user. The feature stapling is in a model where we actually deploy a staple feature where we say that whenever an out-of-the-box theme site is created, let's also modify the out-of-the-box theme site creation by activating a certain alternative feature as well. So whenever the end user actually chooses, as an example, the out-of-the-box theme site, we will provision the out-of-the-box theme site, but as part of that provisioning, we will also check from the database if there's any stapled features, web scoped or site collection scoped features, and those would be then activated, and whatever those features are actually doing, deploying master pages, configuring properties within a SP web or within a site level, those would be then applied at those stapled feature. The feature stapling happens as part of the site definition provisioning. So site collection scoped stapled features will be activated right after the site collection scoped features mentioned in ONET.xml will be activated, and the web scoped features, stapled web scoped features will be activated right after the web scope features mentioned in ONET.xml are activated. So they're activated in between of that site creation, which means that in certain scenarios, if you would actually like to modify the site structure from your stapled feature, that might not be actually possible, because the stapled features are activated before the whole site has been created. Good example would be that you would like to, as an example, modify web parts within a default ASPX page of the site, which is provisioned, and that's not possible to do using feature stapling, because the stapled features are activated before that welcome page is actually available. Classically, it slightly depends obviously on a site definition and so forth. Anyway, the feature stapling is something where we modify existing out-of-the-box site definition, or to be precise, you can modify also a custom site definition, but in general we don't recommend custom site definitions in first place. And feature stapling is actually available in the Office 365 as well. So you're able to actually do that in Office 365, only though in a site collection level. So you cannot actually use feature stapling, for example, for customizing your private My Sites in the Office 365, because you cannot staple in that level or scope, which would be higher than the site collection, which would be required to make the whole system work in Office 365. The following option, what we have in a SharePoint, or what we're going to go through, is the site definition provisioning process. So this is the classic templating system available since 2003 or 2007. There's a significant change between the let's say transitioning from 2003 and 2007. In 2007, the ONET.xml, the structure was, let's say, more understandable. It's still kind of a messy XML structures, but you can actually create them pretty easily. What it means is that whenever we create, or again the end user clicks the new subsite, we will actually show those site definitions which have been deployed to that particular language. And those site definition options will be available based on the webtemp star XML. So it's a webtemp XML or webtemp custom contoso.xml. So the webtemp prefix is actually meaningful. And those files are stored in the 15 template LC ID, which is the language ID and XML folder. So if it would be in English, the default installation, the LC ID is 1033. If you would then install the, for example, Finnish language pack on your system, it would be 1035. So it slightly depends. And the web template XML is the one which is translated then to multiple languages. The web template then, whenever the end user actually selects the web template is then referring actually to a specific folder structure in the 15 Hive. The key point here, we talk about 15 Hive, the site definition has to be always deployed in a farm level, because the information is actually stored in the file system of the servers. So whenever the web template, the end user selects the template, it is actually then telling the SharePoint that, okay, provision the template using the onit.xml in the specific folder, which is stored in the 15 Hive. And the onit.xml is essentially, to oversimplify onit.xml, that's a XML structure defining what feature XML elements will be activated whenever that theme site or whatever template is actually selected. So the onit.xml is actually has unique GUIDs of the feature XML files, which is also stored in a 15 Hive, which is pointing out on which features will be activated. And the order of the activated feature is actually the one which they are defined in the onit.xml. So SharePoint provisioning engine will start reading the onit.xml. It will first provision the site collection scope features. If you are creating a new site collection, then it will activate the stapled site collection code features, then the web code features, and the stapled web code features. Then it will activate the module elements if we have something in onit.xml, and then the list instances from the onit.xml. So there's a specific structure what the SharePoint is actually following, or order based on that. And then all of these features, they might then, let's say, deploy master pages, page layouts, do modifications of the navigation. They might do whatever they need to be done to fulfill the business objective for the end user. And the information is then provisioned, or the structures and provisioned. Then the stapled features are provisioned, site scope features, stapled site code features after the site code features from the onit.xml, and the web code features after the web code features mentioned in the onit.xml. And eventually we will then activate all of the required structures, and we will get the site available. And then the site has a deep dependency on the onit.xml, which was actually chosen. And that's really, really important thing. So if we would have actually created a custom site definition, which would have been used as the site definition structure, now we cannot actually retract that onit.xml anymore from the farm, because otherwise all of the existing sites would actually get broken, which have been created using that onit.xml. And that has a significant long-term impact as well, because now whenever there's a new version available, this custom site definition will be essentially ignored, or the sites created this custom site definition will be essentially ignored by the upgrading sequence, because there's no upgrading actions defined natively for those sites. So as part of the maintenance, as part of the upgrade project, somebody needs to actually consider what will happen to these custom site definition created sites, which is significant cost impact anyway. In 2010, in SharePoint 2010, we then introduced the web template element, which is essentially a feature framework element, which was originally introduced for site templates, or recreation of the site templates, which was the format was replaced from STP to WSP packages, but we can actually create this manually as well, which gives us the benefit that we're able to create publishing web templates, and we're able to create these web templates which are more flexible than site definitions. And I'll explain why that is while we walk through the picture. So first of all, when the end user again clicks the new Subsite, these options are coming to be available based on the scope of the feature, and within the element XML file we would have a web template element defined with a certain title, description, and so forth. That element XML file, when the end user chooses the web template introduced using the web template technique, is then referring to an onit.xml, which is located in the features folder as well, right next to that element XML file. So it's not actually in the 15 site template folder. That onit.xml is kind of a provisioning time alternative, and that's really important thing. So that onit.xml is only read and applied to that site during provisioning time. So whenever we create a site based on this web template on it XML. We activate the features, activate the features what has been mentioned in on it XML, and then we get the site to be available. There are huge, however, differences how the web template is working. So we don't, for example, activate any stapled features because you can't staple features in the web template, because the web template on it XML is only valid and only applied during provisioning time. And what it means is that whenever the site has been created, we will then stamp the site that it would have been created using any alternative site definition. So afterwards, when you go to the SB web object, the database, there's no signs that that site has been actually created using this alternative on it XML. And regardless of this, we didn't actually activate any stapled features from the, let's say, root template. And that is a really significant thing. It means that if you, for example, would like to achieve the same end result as out-of-the-box theme site using the web template mechanism, you need to go and figure out what are those stapled features to the out-of-the-box theme on it XML or the site definition, and include those to the web template on it XML in a right order to make the provisioning work properly. And one of the challenges is also the fact that what will happen whenever there's a update or additional stapled features to the out-of-the-box theme sites, because those won't be added to the web temp on it XML automatically. And that will be then a maintenance challenge which we need to follow up and then update to on it XML for the web template. The good thing is, however, that we're completely supported to update the web template on it XML anytime we want, because that's only read and valid during provisioning time, not actually afterwards. One of the really interesting options when you think of it is the site provisioning provider, and this is actually something which haven't been that widely used, but it has been available in the SharePoint as an option since 2007. And what it means is that within the web temp XML, we can actually introduce a complete alternative to replace the on it XML. So we don't need to actually even deploy on it XML files. What we're essentially deploying within the web temp XML, we're taking advantage of the provisioning assembly, provisioning class, and optionally provisioning data elements, where we're essentially saying for the SharePoint that whenever the end user chooses this template, we will take full responsibility of provisioning that new site. And what it means is that essentially when the SharePoint gets this command, SharePoint initiates that provisioning class and executes our external provisioning provider, and then it's up to us what will happen. Classically, how these have been implemented is that all of these are first provisioning some out-of-the-box themes, out-of-the-box sites like the theme sites, but then using programmatically, essentially creating the SB Web Apply web template based on the out-of-the-box theme site template, and then we modify that template based on whatever is required using the code in our provisioning provider. So we have a full functionality, full possibility to do whatever we want. And what's really nice about this one is that when you think of it, we take ownership of the provisioning. We just create the site using as an example, out-of-the-box site definitions, and all of those table features, all of those functionalities which belong to out-of-the-box site will be applied. And after that, we are able to then still modify the site, and which is a really, really interesting approach, because this will always ensure that whatever has been stable to out-of-the-box theme site, whatever has been applied to the out-of-the-box theme site, will be first applied to the site as well. And then we're able to modify that structure any way we want. Here's a one slider, because this is not that well known approach. This is a one slider from pretty old example, and don't worry about the namespaces and so on. But this example is from showing the web temp XML, where we actually provision two different templates to be available for the end user, the flexible theme and the flexible empty. And you can see that there's provisioning assembly and provisioning class and provisioning data structure applied. And whenever the end user then selects one of these and we click create, that will actually execute then our implementation, which have been inherited from the Microsoft.SharePoint.sb provisioning provider. And in this particular case, it essentially is applying out-of-the-box site definition first to the provided URL or location, and after that it is checking should we activate some additional feature. Really doesn't matter what the code is doing, but essentially we can modify the structure any way we want. Now, this option not available in Office 365, and we don't recommend people to actually anymore start using the site custom site provisioning provider approach, because this is a legacy approach and it's essentially deprecated. It is there for out-of-the-box certain publishing feature capabilities, but it's not something we encourage people to anymore use, even though it's highly powerful functionality. Then obviously when you think of it, there's multiple different alternatives for the site provisioning, kind of a classical approach. Obviously we can do a full custom solutions. This is a one example scenario, really classic one, where the end users are provided a custom form where they can select the type of the site. In this case, we're offering team, community, and project, and we're collecting some additional metadata. So this is not an out-of-the-box form or site creation form. We can provide whatever kind of a form we want. That request information is then stored to a SharePoint list. As an example, stored in the root site collection of the web application, and to that list we can, for example, associate a workflow so that none of these requests are processed automatically until the request has been approved. Whenever the request has been approved, we have a custom timer job running, and the custom timer job is then responsible of checking are there any pending approved requests, and if so, let's actually create the site using then out-of-the-box site definitions, web templates, whatever we want. In the best case scenario, we would always provision out-of-the-box site definition and then modify the existing site based on the business needs. This way we would actually have a positive impact from a let's say maintenance cost perspective. And after that, we then could send an email for the requesters. And this is a really classic scenario which has been implemented quite a few times. But in this particular case, we're using a timer job, so there's no pending for the end user to wait until the site is actually created. So it's kind of asynchronous provisioning, since there's the workflow step number 3 there as well. But since it's a timer job based, that means that it's not Office 365 compliant. So we need to think through an alternative approach if we would like to use the site provisioning in Office 365 as well. Now, what's actually really interesting, or what we should be thinking, obviously, from within a SharePoint product group perspective, from a development perspective and a customer perspective, is that we would be able to actually utilize the same model for on-premises and cloud. Having that icon on the top right corner, which is indicating not cloud, yes cloud, is actually really kind of frustrating. In a best case scenario, we would actually have a one model which works across the environments. And we kind of have it. We are in between of this transition, how the customizations are recommended to be built in a SharePoint. And the introduction for that, or the model for that, is the remote provisioning, which essentially means that we're using SharePoint apps to provision sites with the provider hosted pattern. What it means is that whenever the end user actually clicks the new subsite, we take ownership of that custom page, as an example. So we can provide a super team site, Contoso team site, a blog community project site, whatever, but the page is actually coming from our provider hosted app. So we are essentially overriding the out-of-the-box new subsite creation experience, as an example. Well, there's multiple different options how to do this. And we can even create our own XML-based configuration so that we don't need to hard code anything to our provider hosted application or provider hosted structure, so that we're able to introduce new templates to be available, modify the existing templates. The provider hosted application could also update the existing sites created, these templates and so forth. And as part of that, the provider, whenever the end user actually selects the provider hosted template or template provided by the provider hosted application, we will then use the CSOM, the client-side object model, or REST to actually modify and apply and create the site on a SharePoint site. And then we are able to then modify and activate the features. And we essentially what we do is that we provision out-of-the-box site definition, and then we modify that site based on the business needs. So like in this case, we see Contosa team, super team. Those could be both options would always provision first out-of-the-box site definition, but then they would do small modifications which would be slightly different based on the chosen path. Is it a super team or Contosa team site? Good thing again, if there would be any changes to the out-of-the-box site definitions, those would be automatically applied to all of the new sites, and all of the sites which we have created are essentially indicating to be out-of-the-box team sites, which means that the upgrading, all of that would actually work in the same way as for the out-of-the-box team site, which is a positive thing from a overall maintenance cost perspective. Let's actually have a real demo on the remote provisioning with SharePoint apps. So let's have a look how that can be achieved and what kind of code do we actually need to do to make that really truly happen. Provisioning stuff remotely and applying those changes in or some branding in to the code. Hello. My name is Vesa Juvonen, and in this demonstration we will have a closer look on the remote provisioning technique, which is one of the new possibilities due to the improvements of the client-side object model in SharePoint 2013. This is let's actually start with an out-of-the-box SharePoint site and have a look on how the Subsite provisioning work natively without any customizations. So in SharePoint 2013, when you go to the site content and you click the new Subsite link, you are redirected to this application page, which is stored in a server side, which can be then used to create the Subsite. The templates what we see here are essentially out-of-the-box site definitions or custom site definitions or web templates which have been installed usually using farm solutions or full trust solutions, or optionally if you have actually saved site as a template or developed a custom web template which is deployed in a site collection level as a sandbox solution, those would be available here as well. So we are able to see those out-of-the-box team site, blog project site, and community sites, and also a custom demo publishing site, which is a full trust solution. The challenge with this full trust solutions and actually the web templating system is, however, the significant amount of XML, which quite often needs to be deployed in the farm level. That's true in the site definition way. The only place where it's not true is the web templates which are deployed in a sandbox solution. But that brings additional complexity and brings additional considerations in a SharePoint farm, because now if we deploy our customizations as a farm level solutions, every single time we will do an update, or if we are fixing some bugs or whatever we do on the farm, there will be downtime also for the SharePoint. So not only for the customization itself, it wouldn't be away for a certain amount of time, but the SharePoint and accessing the content in SharePoint will be compromised as well. And that's not obviously a good thing, because that has a significant impact from a operational and operational perspective. So long-term costs could be, well, let's say, difficult. And also the web templates are, even though they are extremely powerful functionality and much, let's say, safer for the SharePoint farm than the site definitions, they do have their downside. So as an example, let's say in the August cumulative patch, if there would be any improvements coming to the out-of-the-box team sites as a stapled features, those wouldn't be applied automatically to the web templates. So even though the web templates has been created based on the out-of-the-box theme site or out-of-the-box publishing site, those wouldn't be actually, the on-it XML has to be always tracked tracked and checked and updated whenever we are actually updating the SharePoint form as well. And obviously that will have a maintenance cost impact. So one of the solutions is to start thinking the provisioning engine and place that outside of the SharePoint. So getting rid of the feature framework, getting rid of the XML complexity within a SharePoint side in a way that we will never ever compromise the SharePoint, even though we would be actually updating our customization or the provisioning engine or the templating system. And the answer for that one is the remote provisioning engine. And what we have here is a custom solution, a custom provider hosted app, which is running in the on-premises. So in this case, I'm running this against my on-premises SharePoint. And since I'm running the stuff in a Visual Studio, this provider hosted application will be hosted in IIS Expression. Just as well, it could be hosted in on-premises IIS, or it might be hosted in Windows Azure if you want to open up connectivity between the Windows Azure to your on-premises, or just as well to the Office 365. But it's a provider-hosted application, which means that the code is running outside of the SharePoint. And let's actually put this one, install that on the farm. So we do a deploy the application to the farm, and it is actually asking quite high permissions. It is asking the full control on the site collection, because we will use this application to create subsites. So we're managing the site collection hierarchy, so therefore pretty high requirements are asked. This wouldn't be a typical a application or SharePoint app from a marketplace, because this is actually violating some of the marketplace rules, but it would be a completely fine solution as a in-house or as a manual, well, not manually, but outside of the marketplace installed SharePoint app to your Office 365 or to your on-premises. So let's install this on the SharePoint, and let's see how the application actually changes the behavior of the functionality. So this is the application UI, but let's not actually concentrate on that one yet. So let's go back on the site. And what we did with the application as part of the SharePoint app installation, we actually handled an app installed event. And within the app installed event, we used this technique called JavaScript injection, which essentially is based on JavaScript files within a SharePoint and a using of a custom action. And using this pattern, and I'll show that pretty soon in the code, we're able to do modifications in a host web. We definitely need to be careful of utilizing this technique, but it's an interesting option to bring additional capabilities available. Like in this case, we are actually updating the link, the new Subsite link, to point not to the out-of-the-box application page, but rather to our provider-hosted app. So what it means is that now when the end user actually goes to the new Subsite functionality and clicks the link, we are being redirected to the provider-hosted application. So we're not actually within the SharePoint. Now we are running this the functionality actually outside of the SharePoint in the IIS application. In production environment, in on-premises, that would be a separate Windows servers, load balanced number. In Office 365, that could be then Windows Azure, or just as well any other hosting environment. So we're running this provider-hosted application now in IIS Expression, since this is a Visual Studio or development experience. And we are able to then enter the values, the selected kind of familiar values when we are creating a subsite. So let's call this a subsite for root, and let's call the site sub. And then we are able to select the template. And these templates are essentially abstractions of the out-of-the-box templates. So we do actually have now an option to introduce multiple different variations of the theme sites. And let's have a look on that one pretty soon. But what we essentially do here is that we're able to now select, for example, the blog or theme site or community site. Let's create a theme site, and our application will start familiar working on it animation. So it feels like it's a native out-of-the-box SharePoint experience. And it will create the subsite or the site collection. And it will slightly modify the subsite based on the branding guidelines within this particular deployment. But essentially, the experience from an end user perspective, it is exactly the same, that we would be hosting this or using the out-of-the-box web templates or site definitions, because the end result is exactly the same. We're getting new subsites created based on the values and based on the given information. So now we have a new subsite created on the site collection. And there's actually some few more customizations. You can say that the branding has been applied. There's a meeting minutes document library included. There's actually a subsite automatically created for the team site. That's based on the configuration what we have. And again, if we want to create a subsite within this subsite, so if we further create sites within the subsite, we're able to again pinpoint the provider hosted application. So we're kind of using this JavaScript injection pattern and the provider hosted app and remote provisioning model. We're kind of taking over ownership of the subsite creation. So let's go back on the sites and have a closer look on the sites. As mentioned, when we selected that Contoso team site template, you can see that we created an out-of-the-box team site. But the out-of-the-box team site actually has a meeting minutes, and it also has a subsite called blogs. And that's to do our configuration. So within our code, the provider hosted application is actually supporting XML-based configuration. Just as well, we could actually build a pretty complex UI on top of this configuration options, but this is a relatively, well, this is a proof of concept. So the UI doesn't anymore exist, or it doesn't yet exist. But we selected the Contoso team site, and this is a customization or a provider hosted application specific configuration for individual templates. So we're actually able to now see that we do have 4 different templates configured in our provider hosted application. And whenever the Contoso team site is selected, we are actually provisioning first out of the box team site, which actually has a massive benefits, because now whatever changes will be introduced at the out of the box team sites will be applied on these sites as well. But then we do something extra. We, for example, upload a few JavaScript files, and these are for handling the JavaScript injection. We create a custom action option, which is essentially making sure that that subsite link is overridden, and I'll explain that slightly later. We also provision a additional site, which is actually referring to the blog site, which is its own template. And we also create a list instance using a familiar feature framework-based XML configuration. But now we don't need to think about this anymore as a feature framework, feature XML, and the complexity of the on-it XMLs and all of that. The SharePoint doesn't actually need to understand any of this XML. The SharePoint doesn't have any customizations even deployed. What we do is that we use the client-side object model, essentially WCF or the web services, to oversimplify things, to create the sites based on our configuration in this IIS application. So just to demonstrate the kind of a functionalities, let's actually create an alternative theme site, and let's call this super team, and it's a super team site. It's better. So we'll do some small modifications. Let's actually add some additional things, like few few document libraries, like presentations. Here we go. The template type is 101, which is the document library. Let's set the title presentations URL as presentations as well, and the quick launch URL, let's put that one there as well. And let's create also CVs. Let's call that just CVs. It's a location for storing CVs for the team. Really just inventing this as we go. Anyway, we now have configured that whenever this template will be created, we will actually create a out-of-the-box theme site. We'll customize that slightly to have also a subsite, which is called a blog, created using the blog template. And we'll also create 3 different list instances to that site after the out-of-the-box theme site template has been applied. So let's actually reapply and redeploy this and just to make sure that we have that new template available. Let's install the updated information. In real life, in production, obviously we wouldn't have to trust whenever we redeploy, unless the permissions doesn't change, we don't need to do any changes on the host web. But as we can see now in this demonstration and in the development box, we are able to now say the super team. Let's go back on the root site. So if you go to the root site, we go to the site contents. One more time, the new subsite link is overridden. We use the JavaScript injection pattern to override that one, and let's call this super. It's super cool site. And we're able to see that super team, which we just configured in our provider hosted application, which now the most important thing is running outside of the SharePoint. And we deployed this additional configuration to be available for SharePoint without any impact on the SharePoint availability. So all of the sites, all of the all of the applications, everything, there was no behavior, no downtime for the SharePoint itself. Yes, we did have to recycle the IIS application, the external application, but all of the out-of-the-box SharePoint functionalities were still all the time available within the SharePoint. And let's create a new site, and let's see that it's actually working properly. So we're creating out-of-the-box theme site, and we'll slightly modify that to have a subsite called blog, and 3 different document libraries. That was meeting minutes, presentations, and CVs. And while we are executing that, we actually might want to have a closer look on what's happening on that JavaScript injection pattern. So let's come back on that one pretty soon. Oh, that actually happened slightly more faster than I was expecting. But anyway, let's make sure that everything is fine. So if we go to the site contents, and we can see that from the navigation as well, we have the CVs, document library, meeting minutes, presentations there. We have the blog. We actually do also inject a new navigation entry on the left navigation. That could be pointing, for example, to your corporate communication or intranet or whatever. And if you go to the new subsite functionality, there's actually a small bug in the code related on minimal download strategy, but now the new subsite link is again overridden to point to that provider hosted application. And how do we do that? Just to kind of show the real code behind of the whole thing. First of all, the configuration, what actually is handled and what's happening, that's read and analyzed by the page. So within the default ASPX in the code behind, we are offering those templates to be available, which are actually in the template in our configuration, in the XML configuration. And actually pretty simple. Whenever we start creating the subsites, we are taking that client context. And we do have then the custom create subsite functionality, which is essentially the one which is making sure that based on the particular selection from the end user, we are reading the XML, we're getting the site template, we are executing or adding the new web. And there we go, we're adding the new web to this particular context web. And then and provisioning that, whenever the web has been actually provisioned, we are adding files, we're adding custom actions, list, navigation nodes, provisioning subsites, whatever. And obviously this is completely, whatever we want to do, it's completely up to us. We can further enhance the functionality. From a demos perspective, in this particular case, we always do hard-coded theming apply on the subsites. Just as well, we could actually upload a master page and apply that, but the theme is actually more flexible from a long-term perspective than master pages, and that's the reason why we are using themes in this example. But we're essentially making sure that the coloring is the same as in the host web. And these could be just as well configurable into XML. But we're using the client-side object model, the classic functioning, for example, the creation of the subsite is just using the web creation information from our provider-hosted application, running outside of the SharePoint and making that happen. The second thing what I wanted to quickly also explain is how do we do that subsite link overriding, which is kind of debatable. Is it recommended? Just as well, we can actually access the create subsite functionality from our app icon. But if we want to provide for the end users the native kind of a feeling that we create subsites using the native out-of-the-box SharePoint experience, we currently need to do some JavaScript injection to make this happen. And what we do here is that as part of the application installation, we are actually injecting a JavaScript on the site. We're using a custom action, which is essentially making sure that this JavaScript file is executed on every single time on every single page on the site. And within the JavaScript itself, we actually have a pretty simple functionality. So essentially, we are trying to get the element ID called create new site. That subsite creation link actually has a unique ID, and we update that unique ID to point to our provider-hosted application. At this point, it's hard-coded to point to this demo or proof of concept URL. Just as well, that could be a configurable entry which is exposed from external web service or whatever, if we want to have a one single location where the information is configured. So we can easily make it more flexible and configurable as well. But essentially what we're doing is that within the HTML, let's actually have a look on that one. In the HTML of the page, in the that create subsite link actually has a unique ID, and we are pointing to that one, and we're updating that unique ID or the href link of that link with a unique ID to somewhere else. The key point to understand, however, on this one is that now that we do have a dependency on the create new site ID. This ID has been actually in a SharePoint since 2007, but we, as a Microsoft, we cannot guarantee that this wouldn't actually go away at some point. So we are actually kind of making an assumption that the create new site ID would be there in the future releases as well. But we are looking into providing more extensibility points on this one, and there will be more information obviously released slightly later. But that's how the custom action and the JavaScript injection actually works. So as part of the installation of the application, so let's have a quick look on that one as well. We handle the event, and in our event handling, we are actually uploading a JavaScript file and creating a user custom action to point to that JavaScript file. So as part of the execution of the page, we will always have that JavaScript file included there as well, which indeed has some small performance impact. But if we think about the overall amount of JavaScript in the SharePoint, that few lines of code really doesn't actually have that big of a deal or meaning from a performance perspective. And it provides us the capability of creating subsites and creating sites using completely custom templating system, which is actually providing us the really nice capability of getting rid of or reducing the feature framework dependencies. So now we can provide whatever kind of templates using this provider-hosted application to the end users. From an end user perspective, functionality is the same. Select which template and the site will be created. So most likely the end users wouldn't actually even notice that it's not their native SharePoint behavior, which is pretty cool. That's all we're going to do in this demo and quick demonstration on the provider-hosted applications, the remote provisioning, and the JavaScript injection pattern. Concentration, obviously, on the remote provisioning and the model where we can remotely actually start creating these new sites and also providing templating system to replace the web template and site definition needs. And all of that customization, or we can achieve the custom specific UI templating system without any customizations deployed directly on the SharePoint as a feature framework element, as a server-side full trust code, which is pretty cool and pretty significant. That's all we're going to have a look on today, so thanks for your time. Good, so that was remote provisioning, and let's actually summarize slightly the site provisioning options. So this is a brief slide, a kind of a comic slide as well, related on different site provisioning options and comparing where they will be available and what would be the kind of a cost impact in a short and a long term. We went through the site definition option that's not available in Office 365, and it actually has a really significant long-term impact on cost because essentially then you need to start maintaining and the upgrade sequence and all of that for the sites which have been created using custom site definition, and it is so to say pretty evil, as you can see from the picture as well. The kind of a slightly more friendlier is the site templates, which is essentially the save site as a template option from the UI, which only works for the theme sites, not the publishing sites. It does, however, have a negative impact on the upgrades. The site templates do not work whenever there's a major version upgrade in a SharePoint. There's maintenance costs with Evergreen, which means that you always need to recreate the site templates. It does, however, work in the Office 365, and it's pretty straightforward to do. So they are not as evil as site definitions, but they are slightly evil as well. The third option is then the web templates, which could be a bad site collection creation story, depending are you using Office 365 or on premises. These are, however, also supported in Office 365 as a sub-site creation, or actually you can create an empty site collection, add a web template in, and then apply that to the site collection. The cost, the short and long-term impact is slightly, well, less than the site definition at least, and they're not as evil because you create site and on provisioning time you use an alternative bonnet XML, but you don't lock it. So the site will still say that, yeah, I'm an out-of-the-box theme site, which will mean that from an upgradability perspective, that site will be taken care of by the SharePoint upgrade team. The fourth option is then the server-side provisioning, like the provisioning providers, essentially provisioning out-of-the-box sites, but then modify them based on the selection and requirements. And this is actually slightly more, let's say, less evil than the web templates. The web templates has the challenge of stable features. The server-side provisioning doesn't have that. And the cost impact, so in a long term, especially is not that significant. In a short term, it might be slightly more difficult to actually do because you need to design that UI where the end user are able to request their sites and then actually provision the sites. But it's pretty straightforward. The only downside is that since it's a server-side code, it doesn't actually work in the Office 365. So it's again not the one solution fits all option for the site provisioning. And the kind of a final option is then the remote provisioning, which is a demo as well. So we use the CSUM to support site collections. We actually support creating of the site collection only in Office 365 standard, not the dedicated one. But there are some changes coming up, so we are enabling new capabilities also for on-premises deployments. The whole point is that we are again creating out-of-the-box site definition, or site based on out-of-the-box site definition, but then we modify that afterwards, after the site has been created. So same approach as the server-side provisioning, but we use client-side object model to achieve this. So we can actually do that from any external side or site or any external location, which is pretty significant. So it's maybe less, again, less evil or a friendlier approach, because those sites will be, well, the functionality is supported in Office 365, even though at least currently the CSM, the client-side object model, is not as familiar as the server-side development. So people might say that it's slightly more costly to actually implement. One of the kind of a classic statements also related on the site collection provisioning or site provisioning is also the fact that, okay, so wait a minute, that sounds all good and fair and good, but I have a problem. So we've implemented some custom web controls or web parts which are used in my existing site. So we want to use this in SharePoint 2013, like the left side navigation is a custom one. Well, there's like a gajillion different website left side navigation implementations. First of all, think about, do you actually need the functionality? If you truly need the functionality, we can actually go hybrid for the transition period in the on-premises. This means a slightly different approach. So we don't do hardcore everything in a SharePoint app or everything in server-side. What we do is actually that we get rid of the feature framework. So we use the remote provisioning for assets, getting the page layouts, master pages, all of that in, creation of the content types, and all of that. But we get rid of the feature framework, XML, and complexity. And then we use the WSP packages only for deploying assemblies between the servers within a SharePoint farm. This would have still the let's say the recycling of the application pool impact, but the deployment would be still easy because there wouldn't be any dependency on the feature framework structure or feature framework, let's say, complexity. Everything would be applied using code, using remote provisioning, or the updates, upgrades to the existing sites would be then applied using the remote provisioning pattern as well. So the simplicity would be simplicity of deployed packages. There would be no complex feature framework structures on a SharePoint farm, and simplicity of upgrades. Only assemblies in WSP packages. And so this is a kind of a compromise between the two patterns. So if we want to simplify the deployment, but we do have that need for, let's say, left side navigation structure. The key point here also to consider is the fact that, okay, fine, but that means still that I'm deploying a server-side code or full trust solution, which is true. But we don't actually change the, let's say, the web controls on web parts as often as the assets. So therefore, taking this hybrid approach, you will decrease amount of service breaks within your farm significantly, because if it's a left side navigation or a few web controls, how often do you actually modify those? The modifications are most likely more on a branding, page layouts, and master pages sites, which you could use the remote provisioning pattern with. So there's a interesting alternative as a hybrid option to go forward. Good. Let's actually have a small summary on the covered topic. So this was a pretty brief and intensive deep dive on the site provisioning options. Or, well, if you know the story, it might not have been that deep, and you were able to follow up on all what I was actually saying. What we wanted to have a look on the model is that what kind of options do we have, and understand that the chosen customization pattern impacts directly the long-term costs and the flexibility of the deployment. So we need to understand the chosen path. Again, no right or wrong. There's no black and white. It's multiple different options, multiple different scenarios, multiple different multiple different ways of impacting the long-term impact as well, long-term costs of the deployment as well. The remote provisioning with CSM from SharePoint app already a viable option, which is true. There are certain scenarios, certain functionalities which are not quite there yet, but those will be addressed. So Microsoft will provide more functionalities to be available using the client-side object model, so that we're able to actually achieve the same end result or the business objectives using the client-side object model as well. And the key point, again, kind of a future roadmap on the SharePoint, is pushing us away from the classic full trust solutions, because if we can actually achieve the same end result using the client-side object model, why wouldn't we actually go there if we can actually minimize the impact of the customizations to our form? Currently, indeed, there are some limitations, but all of that will be worked out, and many of the things will be addressed pretty soon. So it's a really interesting transitioning time within the SharePoint related on how we are moving between the different approaches and moving more on a client-side provisioning techniques, which is actually matching quite nicely how the apps are implemented to the Facebook and Sky, for example, LinkedIn and Twitter and so on. So the model is pretty much the same as with other web development platform or let's say services in the internet as well. And even though you wouldn't be using Office 365, I think that's really interesting approach that you can guarantee the SharePoint to be up and running, at least from a customization perspective, because the customizations are actually running outside of the SharePoint context. And that's all we can actually cover during this slide. So a short and quick intro on the site provisioning approaches and the evolution on the templating model. So how we had a look on what we had in 2007, what we introduced in 2010, and then what we can actually do using the SharePoint app pattern within SharePoint 2013. Hopefully the video was interesting, or presentation was interesting, and feel free to contact if you have any questions.